When I grew up in the 1970s, peanut-free schools were unheard of. Now every parent is briefed about food allergies before their child goes to kinder and school. In the past 25 years, the incidence of allergies in Western countries absolutely skyrocketed in both food allergies and aeroallergens, and scientists are at a loss to explain the phenomena until now. I'd like to give you the latest research on what's affecting allergies and the microflora and hygiene hypothesis to explain how you as building biologists can make significant improvements in educating the patient as to how to improve the house to reduce the incidence and management of allergies. An allergy is an abnormal reaction to an overreaction of the body's immune system to a substance which under normal conditions is harmless. Since the 1990s, hospital admissions for anaphylaxis, which is a life-threatening allergic reaction, have increased significantly in Western countries. They have doubled in the USA, they've increased fourfold in Australia, and sixfold in the UK and in Wales. Worldwide, there's been an increase in allergies like asthma, eczema, hay fever, and food allergies in the past 20 years, with strikingly different courses observed in different countries. And guess what? Australia and New Zealand have the highest rates of allergies in the Western countries. Food allergies currently affect 10% of Australian children. Eczema also affects 10% of children. Hay fever currently affects 1 in 5 or 20% of adults. And asthma affects up to 1 in 4 in children and around 10% of adults in the Australian population. We know hospital admissions for childhood food allergies has doubled between the years 2005 and 2011, reflecting similar trends in other Western countries. Since the 1990s, there's been a 10% increase in food allergies, particularly to cow's milk, egg, nuts and wheat. And there's been a 30% increase worldwide in atopic or allergic eczema. The delayed introduction of allergenic foods has been shown to increase the incidence of developing allergies, and there's been a lot of controversy about when to introduce or whether to introduce food allergies. In 2016, new guidelines came out that recommended introducing allergenic solid foods such as peanuts, dairy, wheat, cooked egg, butter in the first year of life. Now, the interesting thing to note as building biologists is that 50% of children with food allergies will go on to develop allergies to aeroallergens, so allergens in the air such as house dust mite, pollens and pet dander. And this can result in hay fever and asthma. And what gets me as I look at the scientific literature is we look at what causes asthma, etc. Well, we actually know what causes asthma and hay fever. For hay fever, it tends to be your pollens. For asthma, it tends to be your indoor allergens. As I mentioned, house dust mite, cat and dog dander, and potentially pest allergens like rodents and cockroaches. The development or change from food allergies into aeroallergies is what's referred to as the atopic or allergic march. Now, we know when it comes to hay fever that this is primarily due to pollens, particularly grass pollens. And as a result of the reform in the Corn Laws in 1847, which resulted in changes in farming practices that introduced foreign grass pollens in the latter half of the 19th century. And this is what instigated a lot of the hay fever at that time. So changing in farming practices in other countries and introduction of foreign pollens, particularly grass pollens, is what has culminated in the increase in hay fever. And suburbs or towns or cities like Melbourne, which is found in a basin with the Dandenong Ranges around it and the Macedon Ranges, keeps a lot of the aeroallergens within the breathing zone, which is why a lot of people, when they move to Victoria, tend to develop hay fever or have an exacerbation of their hay fever. But why has the allergies increased in asthma and things like eczema? And here is my hypothesis. Having looked through the research in the last couple of years, There are several hypotheses as to why allergies have significantly increased in Western society, and I've come down to 4 factors as to why this may be so. The first one is our obsession with germs. We are so obsessed with germs that we've introduced enormous amount of chemicals, antibacterials, preservatives and pesticides to kill germs and pests, and it's come at devastating costs to human health, which I'll describe shortly. The next one is farming practices and the introduction of pesticides. The third is housing. Our housing has changed significantly since the 70s as a result of the oil embargo and the need to create tighter buildings to save energy to heat and cool our buildings. We've sealed our buildings, and as a result of this made them warmer, more moist, more condensation issues, and introduced wall-to-wall carpet, which of course is perfect conditions for things like house dust mite to thrive. The lifestyle factors also a big part of potentially why allergies have increased, and in particular the fact that children spend so much more time indoors now than they did previously. So hygiene, the introduction of chlorine in our water supply that kills off bacteria, what impact does that have on the gut microbiome? Well, potentially a lot. The introduction of harsh cleaning products, antibacterials and chemicals and solvents that are antibacterial, like triclosan, which targets the thyroid gland, banned in many countries, still used in Australia unfortunately, can have devastating consequences on the biodiversity of bacteria within household dust, which I'll describe shortly as to why that's important. Of course, sprays, we spray our pesticides inside. Many of the chemicals we're using for cleaning are naturally antibacterial also. So obsession with cleaning products to kill germs has actually potentially increased the allergy rate in Western countries. We know changes in farming practices after World War II introduced an enormous amount of thousands and thousands of tonnes of pesticides, which are now found throughout the planet, from the Arctic to the Antarctica, and of course in polar bear livers, where spraying hadn't occurred within 15,000 kilometres away. Pesticides have touched every inch of this planet. We know our housing has got incredibly tight, as I mentioned, as a result of the oil embargo and the need to create energy-efficient homes to reduce the energy costs to heat and cool them, have resulted in building homes that are like plastic bags. Our lifestyle has changed, particularly for children, since the 1960s and particularly the 1970s when people could afford TVs. Children went from spending most of their time outside, being exposed to soil and bacteria outside, to inside watching the television or listening to the radio. And of course nowadays, in the last 10 years, with the explosion of wireless technologies that are now in our schools, our workplaces and our homes, they're spending even more time inside with these devices. So the hygiene hypothesis, which was initially developed by Strawn, looked at and stated that the lack of infections early on in children predisposed them to allergies later in life. The progressive shift to Western lifestyle in the Middle East and Asian countries has correlated to a rise in the prevalence of allergic diseases. So that's an interesting coincidence. Whilst the hygiene hypothesis is still being debated amongst experts and scientists in the field, it is an interesting note to see that Asia and Middle Eastern countries that become westernised, also their incidences of allergies do increase. The hygiene hypothesis has now been morphed into the microflora hypothesis, and this states that the Western lifestyle has essentially not only limited the infections in children, but more importantly reduced their exposures to really important microbes and in particular bacteria. We now know that the gut-human microbiome plays a very important role in the prevention of allergic disease early in life because of the capacity of the bacteria to program our immune response early in life. Now, there was a very important study that was recently published in 2016 in the Amish community. And what they found was that in these children and in the community, which live a very simple lifestyle away from the Western world, devoid of chemicals, that they have a very low incidence of asthma and allergies. Now, in this study, they compared the Amish farm children with the Hutterite farm children, and the Hutterites community live almost an identical lifestyle to the Amish. Genetically, they are very similar, but the only differences between the two is in their farming practices. So it's an interesting thing that they find that the incidence of asthma and allergies are significantly higher in the Hutterite farm children, despite having the same lifestyle, compared to the Amish children. Why? And the study identified that the biodiversity of bacteria and their byproducts and endotoxins in the household dust of the Amish homes was 8 times higher than that found in the household dust of the Hutterite homes. So the type of bacteria and the level of bacteria and their byproducts in the household dust of Amish homes was much, much higher than that found in the Hutterite homes. And we know, as I mentioned, that the Hutterites, the only difference between the two communities is that one uses industrialised farming practices, which includes the use of pesticides in the Hutterite community. And they're now suspecting that this use of pesticides is affecting the biodiversity of bacteria in household dust, which could increase the risk of allergies and asthma. Because we now know the more biodiverse the bacteria is and their byproducts in household dust, it appears to provide an intense and sustained exposures to microorganisms and in particular bacteria and their byproducts, triggering a very healthy innate immune response early in life. So the more types of bacteria and their byproducts you have in household dust, particularly in the first year of life, the lower the risk of allergies and asthma. We now know, and there's a lot of evidence to indicate that children that are brought up on farms are far less likely to develop asthma and allergies, especially if their exposures occur whilst they're in the womb or in the first year of life. We know that reduced gut microbiome during infancy is associated with an increased risk for allergic diseases. So the more diverse the gut microbiome is, the important it is. Now, why household dust is important is because children have a very high hand-to-mouth ratio. And in fact, children can ingest up to 8 times more dirt because they're putting it in their mouth all the time, and their breathing zones are very close to the floor where the dust is. So having a greater diversity of bacteria in the household dust is now what we're suspecting to be very important in the reduction or prevention of allergies later on in life. We now know that there are 10 times more bacteria in our gut than there are human cells. And the human microbiome, once that was mapped, we're starting to realise that there is a diverse range of bacteria on our skin, in pretty much every part of our body, but in particular in the gut. Humans are 90% bacteria. And of course, what we're starting to discover is that healthy people have very unique microbial signatures, as you do, as I do, etc. And this is why we suspect the use of any products or chemicals that are antibacterials or have preservatives in them. And this is why I'm concerned about the use of moisturisers, especially if they're water-based, they're going to be loaded with preservatives. When you put that on your skin, you kill off your natural skin microbiome. Why is that important? Well, we're starting to realise that, the bacteria on our bodies is more effective than the liver in being able to transform chemicals. In fact, to date, there are over 850 bacteria that are involved in detoxifying toxicants or chemicals in our air, our food, and our water. Just to give you an example, we have 3 types of bacteria, Staphylococcus, Pseudomonas, and Micrococcus, that sit on our skin. And when you get tobacco smoke falling onto our skin, these bacteria start to transmute it and change it into different metabolites and to break it down. Now, when we're using moisturisers and creams that are loaded with preservatives, what impact do we have on the skin flora? Well, we don't really know. But of course, what we're doing is exposing ourselves to chemicals which are getting into the systemic circulation and potentially affecting our unique microbial signature. We know that the first 2 years of life may very well be the most important critical window of development that influences the development of allergies later on in life. And after that time, the ability to address those allergies may be we may not be able to help after that time. From the age of 2, it's an interesting coincidence at that same time period, the commensal gut bacteria within the gut become stable and resilient to change. So what affects the gut microbiome? In light of its importance for our immune system and for the prevention of allergies, what determines a child or infant's gut microbiome? And there are several factors that we've now discovered that influence how a child's gut microbiome will be. The first of those is the mode of delivery, or how they are born. Babies born by caesarean section have gut microbiomes that resemble their mother's skin as opposed to their vaginal flora. Now we know that the biodiversity of the mother's skin is significantly less than a child that is born naturally through the vagina, has much higher biodiversity of bacteria in their gut as a result of passing through the vaginal canal. We know that breast milk is very rich in both probiotics and prebiotics, which are essential to provide a healthy infant gut microbiome. We know that infant formula doesn't have these probiotics unless they are added, and they're certainly very different to the type of probiotics you find naturally in breast milk, which is why, of course, breast milk is recommended wherever possible. What concerns me more is that if infant formula is microwaved, the function of the microwave oven is to sterilise. So whatever probiotics may be in that infant formula, you're going to kill it instantly by microwaving that infant formula, because that's what it does, it sterilises. So the only thing I used my microwave oven for when I had my twins was to sterilise the glass baby bottles, because it's great at killing life. But please don't use infant formula in microwave ovens, because you kill off the gut, you kill off the bacterial probiotics that would be in the formula. There was an interesting study recently about the use of nori seaweed in food, and they found that when people ate nori, that the bacteria naturally in the seaweed conferred their DNA, or passed their DNA into the person's gut microbiome to help them digest that food. So we're starting to realise that fresh food, fruit and produce have their own have their own bacteria, which are essential and play an important role in digestion. When we microwave food, we kill off that bacteria, and this is part of the reason why microwave food should not ever be eaten. We know pets have a preventative role to play in the first year of life. So early life exposures to furry pets, cats, dogs and rodents, and their microorganisms appears to be associated with less asthma and allergies. However, this only happens during the prenatal period in the womb and in the first year of life. After that, if you get a dog or cat, domestic animal, after the first year of life, and they're allergic to that animal, then there's nothing you can do. You need to get rid of the pet, unfortunately. But in the first year and during the prenatal period, when a mother is exposed during pregnancy to animal dander, and particularly in the first year of life, it seems to have a protective effect. And this is actually attributed to the fact that the pet has its own microbiome, which it sheds into the household dust, thereby increasing the biodiversity of the bacteria in the household dust. Similarly, families where they have older siblings, if you have older siblings in your family, that child is far less likely to have asthma and allergies, because each person has their own unique microbial signature, which they drop into the household dust all the time. In fact, within 2 weeks of moving into a home, you can actually check the house dust for your microbial signature. It only takes that short period of time for us to actually identify each family member's microbial signature in the household dust. Antibiotics, as you can imagine, has devastating impacts on the infant gut microbiome. So, of course, antibiotics should only be used in critical situations and not overused. The overuse of antibiotics in Western countries is thought to also contribute to the lack of diversity of the infant gut microbiome, which in turn could enhance the incidence of asthma and allergies later on in life. Chemicals have also been attributed to the increased asthma and allergies. We know there are many chemicals that are associated with asthma, from formaldehyde and ozone. Of course, traffic-related air pollutants, diesel particles in particular, have been strongly associated with sensitisation to allergens. In fact, people who live within 200 metres of heavy traffic have a significant increase of asthma and allergies, because it sensitises them to other types of allergens. In Western countries, of course, this is people more likely to afford a car, more likely to be exposed to traffic-related air pollutants. So this is an important question you need to elicit as a building biologist when you're doing an audit. We know there are over 125 million chemicals registered for use on the world's largest database, the Chemical Abstract Service, and every 60 seconds another 20 chemicals are registered for use. So many of these are antibacterials, preservatives, pesticides, etc., which have been known and affiliated with affecting the biodiversity of bacteria and household dust, and therefore increasing incidences of asthma and allergies. So the impact of all these factors on the gut microbiome is essentially devastating, because you are not only what you eat, you are what you host. So let's have a look at the most common allergies in children. And the most common of these is house dust mite. House dust mite is the most common allergies that you find in children, and in fact in the human population. 21% of the world's population are allergic to house dust mites. I find it interesting that these stats exist, and yet the last time you saw a naturopath or a doctor and you had allergies, asthma or allergies, none of them address this, and yet it's so easy to do. And this is why your role as a building biologist is so important. We know if we look down the list, cockroaches, dogs, cats, corn, all of these are common aeroallergens that exist in children. So let's have a look at the most common aeroallergens in the home and what you need to do as building biologists to educate your patient as to how to reduce their exposures. The first one is, of course, house dust mites are the most common allergy in the world, affecting up to 21% of the population. They are the leading cause of asthma and allergies worldwide, which is why it's really important that this is addressed. Up to 85% of asthmatics are allergic to house dust mites. So it's critical, therefore, when you're treating patients with asthma, that you always look at house dust mites as a triggering factor. Let's look a bit about what house dust mites are. They're interesting creatures. They are translucent, which means that they're see-through, and you can't see them because they're incredibly small. Around 50 house dust mites will fit on a head of a pin. There are 100 to 500 house dust mites per gram of dust. In fact, Australia has one of the highest rates of house dust mite in house dust compared to any other country in the world. And part of it's due to our microclimate. We have quite a humid climate, particularly when you get up to the Central Coast and in Queensland. That humidity is what the house dust mite thrive on, and warm temperatures. We know house dust mite do not bite, and they don't spread disease or cause health problems unless you are allergic to their faeces. Males live up to 20 days and females will live up to 70 days. They eat human and pet dander. So dander is human skin cells. So as you shed your skin cells, they will eat that. So we live in a symbiotic relationship with these animals. It's not something you should be killing. The focus of solutions is always to reduce their levels as much as possible, because it's impossible to get rid of them. They're meant to be there in low numbers. If you're allergic to them, however, then you need to try and reduce your exposures as much as possible. They eat human skin cells and pet skin cells. They also eat cellulose fibres, like a lot of your furnishings and mattresses and cottons and materials like that. As well, they eat pollen, and they'll also eat microorganisms like bacteria and fungi and their spores. Each person will shed enough skin cells to feed around 1 million house dust mite every single day. Their numbers will peak around midsummer, and the females will produce about 40 trillion fecal pellets in your mattress every 3 months. So this is why new mattresses have much lower levels of house dust mite versus the older mattresses. The older the mattress is, the more it's going to be loaded with these house dust mite. Now, it's important, they don't have eyes and they can't drink, and that's a key to understanding how to reduce their levels. So they rely on absorbing moisture from the air in order to be able to survive. So humidity is the key to addressing or reducing the exposures to house dust mite, because they cannot survive in dry climates that are less than 40% humidity. It's the protein in their faeces, referred to as DERP1 or P2, that causes allergies in sensitised individuals. House dust mites are generally found in highest numbers in mattresses. The latest study was 1,884 house dust mites per gram of dust in a mattress, versus a carpet which was found to be 600 house dust mites per gram of dust in carpet. So mattresses are the key here, and this is why it's really important that you air them out in full sun as often as possible, and after 10 years they should be discarded. So what are the conditions that enable house dust mites to thrive? And the first of those is moisture. Because they cannot drink, they rely on enough moisture in the air to be able to survive. So any humidity created, so from condensation or from humidity from wet areas in the bathroom, laundry, in the kitchen, if ever humidity levels are hitting 60%, that's going to be ideal for house dust mites to thrive. So in high humid environments, it may be appropriate to either keep the air conditioner on 24/7 if 60% humidity or higher, or if you're living in a warm temperate or cool temperate climate like Sydney, for example, then you will want to use a whole house dehumidifier to try and keep the humidity levels between 45 and 55% are ideal, because that's the range in which they will not survive very well. Warmth, they love warmth. That's why your mattress is great, because you're warm and you sweat, so perfect environment for them. Central heating consistently above 24 degrees is ideal for them. So if you have warm carpets or slab floor heating and it's carpeted, then you're creating a good environment for house dust mites to thrive. And of course food, as I mentioned, skin cells or dander, pollens and microorganisms. So what are the symptoms of house dust mite allergy? And basically hay fever and asthma-like symptoms. So itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, itchy, runny or blocked nose. It could be a dry, persistent cough, or it could be eczema in some cases. Patients who are diagnosed with house dust mite allergies are generally diagnosed with asthma, hay fever, or atopic or allergic eczema. Non-allergic individuals can still be affected by house dust mite, and it can exacerbate existing asthma, so it's still important to address this even though the patient may not be sensitive to or allergic to house dust mite, or it can cause chronic bronchial reactivity. Symptoms, and this is really important how you differentiate this, say, from an allergy to plants. The symptoms are generally worse at night and upon waking, and that's simply because the house dust mite in your mattresses are going to be where the highest load will occur. House dust mite allergies subsequently tend to happen all year round, as opposed to seasonal allergies to plants. So that's a really important question to ask when you're dealing with your clients or patients. Symptoms are generally always present, but they do vary depending on the humidity levels, because of course the higher the humidity levels, as it approaches 60% or higher, the more the house dust mites are going to thrive. In terms of testing, a doctor, clinical immunologist or an allergy specialist should be consulted, who will conduct skin prick tests or a blood RAST test to identify the allergy, and the allergy is created because of an IgE-mediated response. The building biologist, you, can use household tests in order to assess the allergy load. So there are many household tests available that you can use to check for house dust mites. And this can be useful to demonstrate to clients that they're there and why they need to be reduced. Now the reality is house dust mites are going to be everywhere, so the test is going to confirm the obvious. Sometimes this testing can be useful, however, because it helps to demonstrate a visual presence of them, which may encourage the client to actually do something about them. So what do you do about house dust mites? Well, you can't get rid of them completely. You need to reduce their levels as much as possible. So the focus needs to be on reducing the dust. The first thing you need to do is get rid of any clutter in the home, under the beds. Is really, really important, because wherever there's clutter, there's going to be lots of dust. Dusting with a damp microfiber cloth followed by a clean tea towel is really important to do on a weekly basis if you have house dust mite allergies. You're collecting it into the microfiber cloth and then releasing it into the water. A really good vacuum cleaner is critical. A vacuum cleaner fitted with a HEPA, high efficiency particulate air filter, is really important, so it traps most of the dust rather than enabling 90% of it to go back out through the exhaust air. Make sure with your vacuum cleaner it has a motorised head, so it digs into the pile and the rug. Of course, if you don't have carpets or rugs, then you don't need a motorised head. Just a normal head to collect the carpet dust, or the dust, is essential. Discard old mattresses. Mattresses that are older than 10 years old should not be used. Second-hand, hand-me-down mattresses should not be used in children or adults with house dust mite allergies because you don't know the load. So obviously the studies and research indicates that the newer the mattress is, the lower the levels of house dust mite, obviously. Bedding and soft furnishings should be exposed to the sun, dry air, sun as often as possible because the UV will kill off the house dust mites. But of course, over time, what happens is as you expose the furnishings and pillows and mattresses to house dust mite, the level of carcasses and frass, which is the mixture of their faeces and protein, DERP1 in their protein in their faeces, and dead carcasses is going to increase and increase with time. So pillows, of course, should be replaced every 12 months if you have an allergy to house dust mite, and if you don't, then at least every 18 months to 2 years. Wash bed sheets and pyjamas every week in hot water. Hot water is critical, at least 60 degrees, to kill off the house dust mite is important. And I think a lot of the time with allergies, using cold water washers and these energy efficient washing machines that don't allow hot water is not a good idea. You really do need hot water. Use house dust mite resistant covers is really important. They will enable you to, because of their micron size, they don't allow the house dust mite to get through, so that's important in reducing the exposure. So you can get dust mite resistant covers for mattresses and for doonas, as well as for pillows, which is recommended. My only point is that please get natural fibres like eucalyptus fibre or organic cotton or bamboo would be better options rather than polyester materials where people can overheat very quickly and it doesn't breathe very well. And of course, some of these are backed up with PVC, which is incredibly toxic because it contains phthalates and hormone disrupting chemicals. So with your dust mite resistant covers, I've mentioned a few on my website, the brands that I suggest. Natural fibres with a micron thread size of 6 microns or less will prevent dust mites passing through. Big one is to reduce humidity. As I mentioned, in microclimates where it's very humid, a whole house dehumidifier can be a great way to reduce the exposure to house dust mites. If you can't afford that, or if you're renting, then a dehumidifier in the bedroom of the person who's suffering from house dust mite allergies is strongly recommended. Vacuum, as I mentioned, daily, ideally, not practical, but recommended, especially in the bedrooms, providing it's a HEPA filter with a motorised head. And of course, clothing that you're not using for an entire season, I strongly suggest you use space bags where you suck the air out of them, and of course house dust mite can't survive in that. So once you get the clothes or bedding out of the space bags, make sure you wash them and air them in the sun. Another point to make, of course, is soft toys. Not recommended in children who have house dust mite allergies unless you can wash them in hot water on a regular basis, at least every month, at the very most, at least every month, in hot water, and then of course expose them to full sun to reduce the allergy load is important. Reduce the amount of clutter in the bedroom of people with house dust mite allergies, particularly soft toys can be a problem, and lots of blankets, etc. So ideally the bedding would be things that you can wash on a regular basis, like bedding, like sheets and blankets, as opposed to doonas and duvets, which are difficult to wash unless you send them to a dry cleaners, and then of course you expose them to harsh chemicals. Did you know there are no low allergy breeds of dogs or cats? Simply because it's the dander, their skin cells, and the saliva on their skin and their hair that they're creating the protein and the allergic protein all over their body. So therefore, we need to get clear there are no low allergy breeds of dogs or cats. We know early life exposure, however, can reduce the incidence of allergies later on in life, and as I mentioned, this is partly due to the fact that each pet has their own microbial signature which they drop into the household dust and enhance the biodiversity of bacteria in the dust. We know cats produce a protein, FeL-D1, in their sweat glands, which they spread all over their body to their hair and their skin when they lick themselves. They can cause asthma in allergic individuals. They're commonly found in schools, workplaces. Cat allergens are found in schools, workplaces and homes that don't have cats. This allergen is so persistent that a cat owner will have the allergen on their hair and on their clothes, which they then drop into their workplace, into their schools, etc. So it's not unusual to find cat allergens in homes that have never had cats, simply because it's been passed on through a cat owner, through association. Dog allergens is a protein, again referred to as CANF1, in their saliva, which again they spread to their skin and their hair when they lick themselves. And they too can exacerbate asthma in allergic individuals. So pet allergy sufferers are commonly diagnosed with hay fever and asthma, and symptoms include sneezing, runny or stuffy nose, itchy, watery eyes, asthma, cough, eczema, hives in some cases, and some people can actually have a severe life-threatening allergic reaction referred to as an anaphylactic reaction that will require immediate hospital admission. Up to 50% of sufferers will not experience immediate symptoms, so just being near a cat or a dog may not cause symptoms immediately. The response can often be delayed by hours or even by a day or so. So what are the recommendations when you have pet allergies? Well, obviously, don't allow pets inside, don't have a furry pet, choose a reptile instead. So reptiles are not going to have the same allergy exposure to a dog or a cat or a rodent, for example. Remove carpets. There's been a lot of conjecture, do you remove carpets or not, because they act as a sink? Absolutely, get rid of the carpets, really, really important. Brush and wash the pet weekly to remove loose hair and allergens. Now, obviously, if you're allergic to the animal, then you shouldn't be doing this. Get a non-allergic person to actually get a wet cloth, put it over a brush, and then brush the cat or the dog or the rodent weekly to remove the allergenic proteins out of their hair and their skin. Obviously, when you're touching a pet, always wash your hands afterwards. Air filters have also been shown to reduce exposures to airborne pet allergens, and I'll talk about air filters in a separate video. Plants, plant allergens. Did you know that wind pollinating plants such as grass, tree, weed and crop plants are responsible for hay fever? Plants with small, inconspicuous flowers are generally wind-pollinated, and that's important to know because it's the wind-pollinated plants and the pollens that cause the allergies, not the flowers that are relying on bees or birds. They're the ones that are generally not associated with hay fever due to pollen allergy. So plants with bright, showy flowers that rely or are pollinated by insects and birds, and bees, of course, are far less likely to cause allergies. The grass pollens include ryegrass, couch grass, plantain, paspalum, are the most frequent cause of hay fever in Australia and are released in the early morning and in summer, and they tend to descend in the evening. Symptoms are generally worse in the evening. And this is how you start differentiating between house dust mite allergies, which occur all year round and fluctuate, as opposed to grass pollens, which only come in the spring and summer and generally are worse in the evening. Apps are now available from the Bureau of Meteorology on pollen counts, so patients who have allergies to plants should have the app to understand what the pollen count is for the day. And thunderstorms, of course, which can make asthma worse as a result of exposure to pollens after thunderstorms. So this is highly recommended, so you know then to spend more time inside. Common allergic plants, flower pollens from the Asteraceae family, including your daisies, chrysanthemums, calendulas, chamomile, and the marigolds, can cause allergies in susceptible individuals. We have tree pollens that can cause allergies, include acacia, alder, ash, aspen, birch, cypress trees and conifers, elm, hazel, liquid amber, maple, mesquite, mulberry, oak, olive, pine, poplars, privet, she oaks, silver birch, sycamore, walnut, white cedar and willow. So the symptoms of hay fever include sneezing, congestion, itchy watery eyes, runny or blocked nose, asthma, sinus, headaches and sinusitis, eczema, and in some cases joint pain. Symptoms occur seasonally as opposed to house dust mite where they can occur all year round. And they can be immediate or they can be delayed. They generally improve after it rains, although during thunderstorms it can trigger an asthma attack. And during thunderstorms what happens is that it breaks up the pollen into the allergenic particles, into very small particle sizes which aren't trapped in the upper respiratory tract. These small allergenic proteins get down into the lower respiratory tract, and that's why they're causing asthma as opposed to hay fever during thunderstorms. So the suggestions for plant allergies are to remain indoors during high pollen counts, and in particular on hot, windy days during the allergy season. Don't exercise in the early morning during allergy season. Shower after outdoor activities because you'll have pollens on you. Obviously don't mow the lawn. Get someone who's not allergenic to mow the lawn. If you have to mow the lawn, then an appropriate respirator, a P1 particulate filter with an exhalation valve is recommended. And of course, glasses that wrap around your eyes so that it can't come in from the side is important also. Avoid flowering plants inside the home. Turn on the air conditioner. On high pollen count days, your air conditioner will act as a filter, and it will, including both the evaporative cooler and the refrigerated unit split systems, to help get rid of the pollens, because the particle sizes of pollens range from 2 microns up to 100 microns in size. And your filters, your air conditioners and your evaporative coolers will filter those out effectively. Pest allergens. Rats, mice, cockroaches, ticks are pest allergens that some people are allergic to. Now we know up to 40% of children with asthma are allergic to cockroaches. So this is a really important one that you address as a building biologist. Rodent allergens, of course, are far more common in inner city homes where there's more food, more housing, etc. So that's often an issue. When it comes to cockroaches, there are up to 4,500 species, and 4 of those are known to cause allergies. They have a lifespan of up to 2 years. They prefer warm, moist and enclosed spaces, and they eat pretty much everything. They love sugar. They'll eat wax, they'll eat unusual things, and if they're starving, they'll eat each other. A sign of cockroach is actually evidence of an infestation. So if you see a cockroach, then it's important that you implement integrated pest management techniques such as sticky traps in order to get rid of them. Cockroach allergen is Blah G1 or Blah G2. They cause asthma, hay fever, eczema, and in some cases some people will have a life-threatening allergic reaction or anaphylactic reaction requiring immediate hospital attention. Pest allergies. Testing for cockroaches. Baits or sticky traps are a great way to test. As you can see in the picture here, that's just a sticky paper, and once a cockroach is on it, it can't get off. So the number of cockroaches on there and the size of the cockroaches can give the pest controller an idea as to the degree of the infestation. Levels of cockroach antigen. You can also test the levels of cockroach antigen, Blah G1 or 2, in the household dust, although if you see them already, then you can assume they're going to be in there. And obviously, ideally, you shouldn't find more than 1 unit per gram of dust. Higher levels than that can increase the risk of allergies and sensitise individuals. Rodents are common in inner city housing. They're generally found wherever there's going to be food, so compost bins are a big problem. Pet food lying around is a big problem. Housekeeping, where you're leaving food and dishes around at night time so that they attract pests, is a really common problem. So this is the main reason why you'll have pests in the first place. They're associated with asthma, hay fever and eczema. Insect allergies are generally only a problem when a person is stung by a bee, wasp, mosquito, a midge, a march fly, tick or bull ant. Symptoms will be localised itching, redness, swelling that settles within days. It can result in a life-threatening anaphylactic reaction again in patients who have allergies to these insects like bees. Ticks attach themselves to grass, the blades, and transfer themselves to passing animals and humans. They cause local irritation and swelling at the site, and in some cases they can cause anaphylactic reactions in sensitive individuals, which of course requires immediate hospital attention. Some people who get tick bites, because the tick injects chemicals or poisons into the systemic circulation and blood, a small percentage of the population may actually be sensitive to ticks, and rather than causing an IgE-mediated allergic reaction, it can cause a chronic inflammatory response syndrome and be misdiagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. Those symptoms I've gone into detail in the mould testing course, but mould can cause a very similar reaction, and it's a full systemic reaction resulting in inflammation in the brain, leading to brain fog like poor concentration, poor short-term memory, anomia or loss of words mid-sentence. It can lead to other things like poor circulation to the limbs, poor circulation, fibromyalgia, muscular aches and pains, sleep problems. So ticks that are not removed can produce these poisons, which in some individuals can cause a chronic inflammatory response, and this needs to be addressed. Now, if you have a tick bite, it's really important that you kill it before you remove it, because as you remove it, it releases more poison or toxins into the body. That's why you need to get to a GP as fast as possible. So what can you do for pests, rodents, cockroaches, etc.? Well, the first thing you need to do is to get rid of the food and water, because the reason why they're in your home is because there's a source of food and or water. That could be the pet bowl that's sitting outside that's attracting animals to the place. It could be, as I mentioned, food left around in the kitchen or in the, under beds, in the kids' rooms. I'm always surprised how much food I find when they're sneaking into the cupboard and eating foods under their bed. I don't know about it. And then wondering why I've got mouse poo there. So food and water, really important. Housekeeping is critical to reduce the pests, because that's why they're there. Any form of odour is going to attract things like bees and wasps. So it's really important to try and get rid of the odours and enhance good ventilation, passive ventilation in the home as much as possible. Eliminate the shelter. Clutter around the home, wood piles, any form of clutter immediately around the home is going to attract termites, it's going to attract pests, spiders, you name it. So it's really important to get rid of clutter in the subfloor, under beds, inside the house, immediately around the home, because they're going to use it for a form of shelter. Don't let them in. Often after a tradie comes, you often find that all of a sudden they have a means to get in because accidentally the duct work got, poked a hole in it, or there were holes as they were fixing up the plumbing, and now they can get in. So it's really important to inspect your home at least every year on the outside and in the subfloor if you have one, to check how they could be getting in, and then using simple things like steel wool to plug it up to prevent rodents coming in, or possums, for example, just making sure that there's no way that they can actually get in the first place. Remove the frass. Frass is a mixture of feces from animals like cockroaches and rodents and and insect parts and body parts. Really important that you remove it with a good vacuum cleaner. I've mentioned again, a HEPA filter vacuum cleaner with a motorised head is important, preferably every week if you have an allergy. Some say every day. If you have cockroaches in your mattress as well, you need to get rid of it. There's just no option, unfortunately. Insect allergies, wear light clothing. Any form of bright coloured clothing is going to attract insects, so it's important to wear light clothing, and more importantly, cover up. So if you're going in a field during seasonal allergy season, you want to make sure you've got good boots on, not thongs, that you're covering up completely in order to reduce your exposure or the chances of being stung in the first place. Another recommendation is integrated pest management. Now, we'll go into detail on this in the building design subject, but I do want to mention this website. It's the best website I've ever seen on integrated pest management, and basically they use physical means to address pest problems, from sticky traps, baits, gels, boric acid, or even diatomaceous earth. The website is pesticide.org, and it's by the Northwest Coalition for pesticides, and it's absolutely brilliant. You can look up the Pest. It will go into detail on the psychology of the pest, what they're looking for, and how to actually reduce your exposures, and what, more importantly, you can do to reduce, not attract them in the first place and get rid of them without the use of harsh chemicals and pesticides. Mould, in terms of allergies, a significant portion of asthmatics are going to be allergic to fungi. Of course, 1 in 3 Australian homes are water damaged. So this is really one of the most common triggers of allergies that we have in the home. We know that once a home gets water damaged, that water, within 48 hours, the bacteria and the fungi are going to outcompete one another and produce mycotoxins and endotoxins, and outcompete for one another to get that site and create like a chemical stew of inflammagens. So as a result of this, it's really important, if you have any spills or overflow of water or drainage issues, you really need to mop that up within 48 hours. After that time, it's just going to be a chemical stew of biologicals and chemicals being released into the air. 24% of the population cannot create antibodies to mould, which means every time they're in a water damaged building, it sets up this inflammation that won't stop whilst they're in that building. They are often misdiagnosed with chronic fatigue syndromes or fibromyalgia, when in fact it's actually this chemical stew of inflammagens causing this inflammatory response. So because mould is so prevalent, 1 in 3 Australian homes that are water damaged and 1 in 4 people that can't create antibodies, this is the key thing that you have to think about as building biologists to address allergies in a home. You always have to think mould first. Now, because of the complexities of this topic, we will spend 200 hours on mould testing and mould, and in a subject on its own. So I don't want to say anything more about that, apart from the fact that people can have an IgE-mediated allergic response to mould, but they can also have an inflammatory response as well, causing this chronic fatigue-like symptoms. So the college offers an advanced diploma of building biology. It is nationally accredited, government accredited. It's 2 years full-time or 3 to 4 years part-time. We run training electromagnetic fields, mould testing, allergens, chemicals in air and water and indoor air quality, and of course how to build a healthy home. For more information, refer to our website, that's aces.edu.au, or ring us on 1300 889 845. Thank you.